Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to part 2 of Using Art in History and Literature classes, What's the Story? An online professional development seminar sponsored by the North Carolina Museum of Art and America in Class from the National Humanities Center. I'm Richard Schramm, Vice President for Education Programs at the Center, and I'll be moderating the session tonight as I did Tuesday night. Before we get underway, let me just remind you that at the end of the seminar, you'll be able to go to the Using Art in History and Literature classes website, and there you will find a recording of this evening's session and a recording of part 1. You'll find the PowerPoints for both sessions, and you will also find an evaluation. And this time, we really would like you to fill out the evaluation and submit it to us. You can find it online, submit it online, and just click a button and it'll come to us. And once we receive that, we will send you a letter that you can present to your local certifying authority to obtain whatever recertification credit your participation in the seminar warrants. Now, let me remind you also that we have put together a bibliography of images ready for classroom use. On these images, you can use the techniques you've learned in our two-part seminar. To find those images, you can go to that URL on the screen, but you don't need to worry about copying it down because I have posted a link to this bibliography on the seminar form. So if you go to that, find that my entry on the seminar form, that will provide you the link, and you can go to this bibliography. I really urge you to do that. I think you will find it very rich. We offer lots of resources running from 1492 up through 1968, and I think you'll be able to fit those resources into lots of themes in your history and literature classes. Now let me review our goals in our seminar. We hope to help make history and literature teachers more comfortable with and confident about using art in their classes. We hope to provide object-based discussion strategies to use with students. These will all help teachers meet the visual analysis components of the Common Core State Standards. Now, after session 1, I think we are well on our way to achieve those 3 goals. Tonight, we are going to focus on the 4th goal, to show how knowledge of historical context can affect a viewer's perception of a work of art. Now, another way to say that is how to build a bridge from the details of a close reading, and we worked on those details last time, of course, to the larger themes we teach in history and literature classes. With us again tonight to lead us through our discussion are John Coffey, Deputy Director for Art, and Ashley Weinard, a museum educator, both on the staff of the North Carolina Museum of Art. And now let me turn the program over to Ashley, who will begin this evening's session. Ashley, it's all yours.
Thanks, Richard. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to welcome you back and just summarize a couple of the points that we made on Tuesday. I think we covered some great ground with, providing some good tips for ways of using art in the classroom and some questions that you might be able to use with students just to begin to get them immersed in looking and to explore through an open-ended dialogue about what's going on in a picture, what else can they find, and looking critically. And I would encourage you, hopefully, to use those questions in your classroom if you haven't already. And I just want to say that it is possible and it's very useful to just sort of, try those out, and that may be all that you do with a work of art. You might introduce it as a way of, again, introducing different kinds of genre or periods of time, again, to build analysis skills that we discussed on Tuesday. But you can also go further by making connections to what it is you teach, whether it's history or literature, humanities, and you are the expert in your content area and can begin to make connections and draw out more connections for students after they've explored and had a chance to look on their own. You are the ones who know best kind of where they need to go with regard to their learning goals and how this work of art might be used to support those learning goals and objectives. And we want to encourage you to use works of art even if you don't know a lot about them. You know a lot from your experience and also from your content area, and you can build an understanding of those works of art, and your students can build their own understanding. Sometimes we have the great opportunity to explore works of art with experts, or we have an opportunity to immerse ourselves in research about works of art. I know it's difficult. Not every object on the internet has information around it. It can be hard to find background information about works of art, about the art history, about the works, about the artist, about their context, their original function, etc. But when you can find that, and there are many, many good resources out there, when you can find that, it's really a way to kind of delve deeper into the work of art and to place it within a context and to see it within this information and to see how that information changes the way you view works. And understand them, and how hopefully we can bring a different level of understanding at the student level too. So tonight we have John Coffey with us, who is going to talk a little bit more in detail about the 3 works that we saw and give us some wonderful information about them, which we can help to piece together the details and our initial ideas and make further connections and come to a deeper understanding of the works. But I will just say that, remember, all good historians and specialists in literature and art history know that scholarship is always changing, and that's one of the things I think is important to teach students, that there isn't one particular finite, meaning about any particular work of art, just like text or history. It's evolving. Our understanding of works evolve, just like our understanding of nature and science evolves and changes. And if we didn't have different interpretations, there would be no such thing as scholarship, and really not many scholars at the National Humanities Center. So we want to always be thinking about meaning, but also aware that we bring personal meaning, and our own personal experiences can inform works of art, and we can see them through our own eyes differently, perhaps, than others do. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, and before we investigate these works further, and hopefully make you comfortable with the fact you don't have to be an expert in art history to use works of art in the classroom. You already know a lot, and you need to trust your eyes. But I hope that you will enjoy this rich conversation that we're about to have with John, and then we'll come back at the end and think about how we see differently. So I'm going to turn it over to John.
Okay, let me make John the presenter. Ashley, if you could mute your microphone, please. Thank you. Before I turn things over to John, let me just walk through the door that Ashley opened for me when she said that it's often hard to find notes and things that provide you background to art on the web. Well, that bibliography I mentioned, you go there, you will find links not only to the art, but links to notes that offer extensive background on the art that we have on the bibliography. So with that, let me turn it over to John. John, it's all yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Richard, and good evening, everybody. This is very much my my maiden voyage with this this technology, so you will bear with me. What I thought we would do is just let's go directly to a picture and pick up the discussion that we began on Tuesday, but start adding some other layers of interpretation to it, not just looking at the picture cold, but then begin to think of it in terms of its context, various contexts, historical, social, etc. And I would first like to just share with you my favorite quote that has always stuck with me ever since I was a kid watching a movie called The Go-Between. It has the best opening line of any movie I've ever seen, and it goes like this: "The past is like a foreign country. They do things differently there." And that has always been something when I talk with classes, is that even though we're American and we're looking at an American subject, we're looking at something that is separated from us by over 150, 160 years. And the people depicted and the artists who painted it, the people who looked at the painting for the first time in exhibitions, in many ways are foreigners to us. And we need to learn to get something into their mindset, into understanding their culture and how they would have perceived this image, how they would have used this image, not just looking at what the artist might have intended, but how it would have been received in its own time in 1838 and the years that followed when it was being publicly exhibited. Now, this picture was, we know a great deal about this painting. We know the title, which is an important cue. The title that was assigned to it by the artist when he first exhibited it in 1845 in New York at the annual exhibition of the National Academy of Design, and it came under the title of Kitchen Ball at White Sulphur Springs, Virginia. We've already noted that it's now West Virginia, but in antebellum period, it was the western part of the state of Virginia. We talked a little bit about what White Sulphur Springs was. It was probably the most fashionable summer vacation spot for the wealthy, particularly the plantation class of the Upper South, people who wanted to flee the heat of the lowlands, lowland Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, and they would pack up their very large trunks into wagons, be accompanied by their household servants, who were all slaves, and go to the mountains of Virginia, and there have a very nice, indolent 2, 3, sometimes 4 months, in which they would race horses, dance, read, talk politics, drink, gamble, all the fun things. And the migration of these families from their plantations to these watering holes, as they were called, was a regular fact of life in the South during this time. So that's the sort of background of the importance of White Sulphur Springs. It's a name everybody would have recognized, even in New York when it was exhibited. It was a place that attracted visitors from all over, including Frederick Marryat, the Englishman. That we have a quote from him, but we'll get to that in a moment. The other thing is, let's look at the story of this artist, Christian Meyer, who was German and had only a few years earlier come to this country. Already an established artist, he primarily painted what are called genre pictures, which are scenes of everyday life. This is this painting here is far and away his most celebrated painting and a genre painting. But scenes of everyday life were very popular, not just in the United States, but in Europe during the 19th century. They often focused on lower middle class and lower class subjects. And then, somewhat ironically, they were collected and hung in the houses of upper middle class and upper class people, which is an interesting thing to talk about as well, of rich people hanging paintings of poor people. What is the need of the wealthy to have images of the poor in their parlors? The Christian Meyer, as I said, was a genre painter, also a portrait painter. We don't know why he ended up at White Sulphur Springs, except it makes a lot of sense for an itinerant painter. You had to move around from one place to another. There were not enough commissions to be had in any one locale, particularly in the South, so you were itinerant. I'm guessing that he went to White Sulphur Springs intending to paint portraits of a lot of indolent white people, where they had nothing else to do but sit and be flattered by a portrait painter. What is interesting then is if that is the reason he got to White Sulphur Springs, why he went there in the first place, he seems to have gotten sidetracked. His other interest in genre painting and seems to have kicked in, and he became attracted to what to a German would have been a very exotic subject of black people enjoying themselves. And so you have, if we can go to the quote again, Frederick Marriott was quite a snobby Englishman who was traveling around America and kept a diary in which he made all kinds of snarky comments about Americans and how unsophisticated, provincial they were. But he ended up at White Sulphur Springs, and in his diary he has a very nice little paragraph displayed here, in which he's giving an amusing anecdote relating to Christian Meyer, who seems to have had a sense of humor, knew the English language enough to make a pun on it, and confirms that the painting depicts specific people. It is not just a generic view of African Americans having fun, but these are specific people. If you go back to the painting and look very carefully at the faces of over 30 people that are here in the painting, it's clear they're portraits. He is distinguishing between one figure and another. He has really observed these individuals as individuals, and this is one of the most remarkable things about this painting, is how the artist has looked upon a group of black people and seen them as people and not as caricatures, as somehow not fully human in the way that, say, the U.S. Constitution made them out to be, only fractionally human. That it has been constantly commented upon by people who have looked at this painting, art historians in general, that this is one of the very, very few images of antebellum slave society in which there are no white people, and in which the slaves, and we are assuming that most of these people are enslaved African Americans, that these slaves are treated as human beings, as individuals. Some are pudgy, some are thin, some are fair-skinned, some are dark-skinned, and the interactions, the many different kinds of interactions among them indicate an artist who is observing very carefully the human interactions of this community. This doesn't happen much in American art at this period, because American artists generally adopt the same degree of prejudice and sort of blinders to race as the general population. And if you have depictions of African Americans, they are often, too often, caricatured quite vilely, and to emphasize their subordinate position, and they're often put in demeaning roles. And we should go look at, as a example, the image down the lower right, William Aiken Walker, who made a very nice living painting paintings of stereotype poor black folk, cotton pickers and the like. These would be paintings for a white audience, obviously. A much more sophisticated painting is in the upper right of by Eastman Johnson, who is about 20 years older than or younger than Christian Meyer. And this painting, one of the most famous 19th century American pictures, was originally titled Negro Life at the South, but came to be known popularly as Old Kentucky Home. It was painted just before the Civil War, and is really the last important antebellum picture of African American society. But what is interesting here, and it may be difficult to see, is that you have this backyard of full of black people doing all kinds of domestic things. It was playing the banjo and a kid dancing and a flirtation and such. But you also have in the lower right is a white woman has stepped into the courtyard, and her presence immediately changes the dynamic in the picture. And that is what you often find in American art at that time, is that the white person ends up always being the focus of attention, and that the blacks are clearly subordinate. We'll get into that in the picture that follows as well. But I'd like to see some discussion about what I've been talking about with this painting of the kitchen ball. Well, let's talk about the wedding, the idea of this being a wedding. There's several things that are problems with that. And one of them is that the title doesn't say wedding. And you would think that if this celebration was specifically a wedding celebration, that the artist would have said it as such. Instead, it is more a generic kitchen ball. It is a revelry among the household servants of the families that have been brought up to White Sulphur Springs, as well as the slaves and the hired blacks who worked at the spa. They're getting together after hours. It's clearly dark, and they're throwing a party. And they're throwing a party that in many ways mimics the festivities that you would find in the white people in the big house. The dances are perhaps the same, certainly the clothing, but the interactions, they're not out of place in white society as well. So there's something of a parallel society here being depicted. But I'm not convinced it's a wedding. And the other thing is that you have to look very closely, but there is another woman dressed exactly like the central, the bride, quote, the bride in the center. And she is to the right of the man dressed in white. And she's got the same floral headdress and the white dress as well. And that, to me, just somewhat reduces the specialness of this central female figure. It makes her seem to me less of a bride. The other thing is that white as a wedding dress really did not become that common until Queen Victoria's wedding, which took place 2 years after this painting. in 1840. Before that time, women were married in all kinds of colored dresses. White was not specific to a wedding. And finally, weddings among slaves were not unknown. They were not, I don't know, they may not have been as common as we think. And the celebration here of this couple may not be a formal wedding, which may not have been allowed at the time. You have a lot of couples here, of people interacting, of the sexes interacting and flirting with one another. The one in the center that are in white, I'm tempted to almost see the gentleman in white as almost in livery, and that he may have been somebody who worked a waiter at the tables or such. That may be another explanation, but I'm not sure. There is, as Ashley said, there is a lot of ambiguity in these images. One should never treat them as cold fact. They're open to interpretations. Sometimes the interpretations just change from generation to generation as our own eyes change, our own experiences, but also what we know. The more that we know about the period, the painting, the artist, and such adds to sort of a cumulative interpretation, but it is ongoing and subject to revision. And whatever I said now and psychobabbling about it is, can be disputed by a host of people. You've read the very close reading that Richard Powell gave to this painting. Richard Powell is one of the preeminent African American art historians working today, and he he finds this painting one of the most important images of African Americans in the 19th century. And his close reading of the picture, he's trying to tease out of it the different relationships of the sort of encoded racism in the painting, and so let's finally get to the final interesting part to me is what is the attitude of the viewer, particularly the viewer of 1838. Well, let's say 1845. You're in New York. You are going to the annual exhibition of the National Academy of Design in New York, and you see this picture for the first time hanging. What are you going to think?
Hey, John, could we go back to that? Good. Okay, great. And while people are pondering that question, what would you think? Let me just bring in some really interesting chat here and pose a few questions to you that people have asked. First of all, do you think this painting was done on commission, or was it something that Mayer did in just freelanced it, well, not freelance, but on spec and hoped to sell?
He definitely did it on spec. He kept the painting for at least 5 years afterwards, actually 7 years afterwards, because when it was exhibited at the National Academy, it was still in his collection.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and we had the question you posed, why would rich people want to hang paintings of the poor in their homes? I posted that, and it is as a good discussion question to raise with students, and it got some interesting responses here among our teachers. They noted that people might not always have been rich. These paintings might have evoked nostalgia for the past experience, or to romanticize poverty, maybe to remind themselves of their supposed superiority, almost say, look at them, we are better. What would you say? Why would people want to buy images like this, particularly in antebellum America? Why would they want to buy images like this and hang them in their homes?
Very good question, Richard.
Well, you actually raised it, John.
I know. I mean, it's one of these puzzling things, because I'll be showing some images also of just poor bootblacks in a little bit later, and why rich people would want to have street urchins, pictures of street urchins. It's the same thing. But say if you're in New York, which is a free state, and a free state does not mean a racially enlightened state, but at least there is no slavery there. What is your attitude to looking at this picture in 1845? Would you find it kind of in the same way that, say, Christian Meyer, somewhat exotic, an interesting world that you're not part of, but it would be like looking at a lot of Germans doing, Germans and Lederhosen doing dances? I mean, is it just the foreignness of the subject? Is it that you does it confirm your idea about slavery, or what you've heard about slavery, that it's not that bad, as somebody has pointed out? These people are quite well fed. They're well dressed. They've got elegant manners. They know the dance steps. What's the big deal? And so, on one hand, you have an artist who is sympathetic enough to see these slaves as individuals, but he's not really criticizing the institution of slavery. And so he's turned it into an amusement, a visual amusement for people. And I think that's where somebody in the 1840s might find this picture attractive, is it is just amusing. It has got so many different things to look at. It rewards a second and a third and a fourth look. I mean, every time somebody talks about it, when you all were chatting about it on Tuesday, you were pointing out things that I had not seen or I'd forgotten about, and I was putting them together in a different way. I mean, I'm still worrying about this guy in the back with the chair. He's holding the chair up. Rick at one time, thinks that it's a holdover of an East African stool dance, West African stool dance. And I'm saying, well, maybe so, but maybe the guy is also just moving the furniture. All the sort of the accoutrements of a kitchen. You've got the braided garlic hanging from the rafters. You've got a coffee urn. You've got various roasting grills hanging on the walls. Those kinds of things that are just, your eye keeps roving around the picture and just having fun with it. And I think that amusement level is what is appealing, and that's probably why Mayer was interested in it in the first place. And whoever bought it, and we don't know who bought it from him, probably hung it that way.
Well, now, you've suggested, and other people here in the chat have suggested, that this is kind of a benign view of slavery, an unrealistic view. Well, what about the argument that Mayer was viewing slavery with a kind of naive eye, and that this, slaves, actually, when they were sort of off duty, they may very well have celebrated like this, and they may very well have had a good time. So what about the argument that this may be actually a kind of realistic painting, and Mayer was not being ironic and was not trying to apologize for slavery, but was actually presenting the way people amuse themselves?
Well, I'm not in any way saying that Christian Mayer had a political agenda.
Okay, all right.
I think this kitchen ball actually happened, and it's somewhat confirmed by Frederick Marryat, who, said that the people in the painting were known to him. They were the well-known colored people in the place.
Right.
And if you look at the way that Mayer moves the bodies all around in order to get as many portrait heads as possible squeezed into the painting, it's almost like the Dutch masters paintings of the 17th century. How do you do group portraits? I don't think Mayer was after a political agenda here. I think and that these kinds of celebrations were not uncommon in the South, not just at White Sulphur Springs, but there are plenty of instances in which plantation owners would rent a function hall for their slaves, for their household slaves, the slaves that had manners and breeding and such, for them to have a party, a big celebration, a dance. There are lots of instances of that. So this kind of celebration that Mayer is showing is not uncommon in the antebellum South. I think he, as a German, as somebody, he's only 5 or 6 years off the boat. I think it is certainly likely that he was attracted to the exoticism of Black culture more than American artists who had grown up with it around them. That he also did not have the racial blinders that native-born American artists would have had. And you find that often with European observers of American culture, Alexis de Tocqueville being the major one, is that they see things differently from us. They, what we take for granted as a settled relationship, they find curious and want to analyze it. And in the case of Mayer, he may have come there to paint all of the white people, but he just got fascinated with what was going on down in the kitchen. And it may have been as simple as that, and he may not have had any agenda at all, but just to put together an interesting picture that would further his career.
Right, and in fact, along those same lines, we have comment here, blacks may have been a good marketing tool, the exotic for both artists and viewers. Blacks were perceived as being exotic, so that he may have been playing to a market. Did he paint any other pictures of slaves?
Well, that's interesting. When this was shown in 1845 at the National Academy, he also showed a picture that was called Juba Juba in the Kitchen in White Sulphur Springs, and Juba is an African dance, and so there's a question: was he really seeing this as a pair? That one would show the Black community behaving more like Africans, and the other would show them behaving more like refined whites. The problem is we don't have that other picture. It's completely lost. So we only have the title that sort of teases. It's Juba, J-U-B-A. And so that's one of those nice, somewhere in somebody's attic there may be a picture, and if you find it, it's a gold mine.
Okay, I'm going to look for it. We may turn up on the Antiques Roadshow next week, and somebody may be really surprised.
Right.
Okay then. If we have a question here or a comment, it would be interesting to see some of the artist's other works in order to understand how this image fits into his understanding of America. That's true. He said his one key work, Juba, we do not have. But I will refer our participants to the images that we saw earlier, where John compared this image to other images of African Americans, and there you can generate a discussion about how this one fits in, particularly compared to the field hands. Okay, John. Well, shall we move on then?
Yes, let's go to the next painting, which is roughly 20 years later. It's painted in right in the middle of the 1850s, a very convulsive decade in this country. It's the decade before the Civil War, but a lot more than just races going on at this time. And this painting shows up, also exhibited at the National Academy of Design. National Academy was the preeminent art viewing place for contemporary American art at the time, something like the Whitney Biennial. And they had a spring exhibition every year where all of the major artists would show their best things, and it would make or break careers. This artist, Charles Blauvelt, is it's important to know he is a second-generation German-American. So his German background, I think, is important in assessing what's going on in this picture. The title is original to it, as it was exhibited at the National Academy under the title "A German Immigrant Inquiring His Way." It's a fairly straightforward descriptive title. You all analyzed it very well last time. If you didn't know the title, you could pretty well tell that this guy is from Central Europe, probably Germany. The military hat that he's got, the long coat, and then the somewhat sort of Disney-like clay pipe that he carries, which is probably just to scream German at you when you're looking at the picture. And the peasant costume of the little girl, and the big bag of belongings for the wife. This is a painting that takes place in New York. The artist had a studio in New York. There's no reason to believe that it depicts any other place, Brooklyn or New York City, Manhattan. It's the backyard of a townhouse. And as you all, we analyzed it. You have two workmen, one white, one black. One is chopping, one is splitting, one is sawing, and one is splitting, and they're interrupted by this German family right off the boat. Okay, sorry. This is a wonderful genre painting in that if you treat a genre picture something like a short story, it has all these narrative elements scattered around that will give you a little bit of the story before the painting and maybe an indication of what will follow after the painting. So you have the axe that is laid aside. You have the bucket of what I would like to think is beer in it, but who knows? Over the lower right, the hat and coat are put aside because it's hard work. They have been working. It's quite sweaty work. And then you have then the moment arrives and these Germans show up, and is he even speaking English is another question. Are they having linguistic problems communicating? Because if he is a German, he doesn't know English. That's one of the problems with the Germans in the 1850s. And so the black man may have been looking at him not just because he's a little exotic. You don't see many people going around with a clay pipe all the time. But he may not understand what this guy is saying, and so the gestures then become more demonstrative as he's trying to figure out where to go, both specifically and sort of metaphorically. The 1850s was one of the high points of German immigration. In the period, in the decade before this painting was done, from say 1845 to 1850, 1 million Germans came to this country on boats, and most of them came through the ports of New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, but mostly through New York. So New York was awash in outlandish people, and it was not just the Germans, it was the Irish. And the Irish, the Native Americans hardly credited the Irish with being human. We can look briefly at some of the caricatures. I particularly like the one, interested in the one on the upper right in which the African American and the Irishman are seen as sort of equally despicable. The Irishman is caricatured almost ape-like, and it's as derisive as the caricature of the plantation darky on the left. The other caricatures show how the immigrants coming in either don't mix in with the rest of Americans, or they're thieves, brigands, who are going to impoverish the Native Americans. So let's go back to this picture again. And the question, politically, the influx, the sort of tsunami of Germans coming into America in the decade before the Civil War proved convulsive for American politics. We normally think, right before the Civil War, everybody was concerned with slavery and the black-white problem. But if one looks at the 1850s, there was as much passion spent on immigration, screens of the country being awash in people who did not deserve to be here, that we should push them all back on the boats and send them back to Europe. There was a political party, the American Party. It was a nativist expression, a virulent nativist political expression called the American Party, or the Know Nothing Party. And they came very, very close to seizing power in 1855, which is the same year that this picture is painted. So, knowing this, when I first came to the museum and I would take people around looking at this picture, they all thought it was quaint. Isn't it? It's very, it's quaint. The man is dressed quaintly. He's, just asking directions. Isn't that cute? The little girl is cute, and so on. And nobody treated it terribly seriously. But if you can spool your brain back to 1855, and you're going to see the National Academy's exhibition, and you see this painting, and the title is "A German Immigrant Inquiring His Way." And just outside the windows of the National Academy are camps of Germans trying to get from one place to another. You can go into streets in Lower Manhattan and not hear English. There's a lot of violence, communal violence between the Irish, the Germans, between the Native Americans, between the African Americans there. It's gangs of New York, basically. And so what do you make of this painting now? What's the position of the artist of this painting?
Okay, good question. What's the position of the artist here? And Mary is noting that some of those gangs tended to be Protestants versus Catholic Germans. While we're waiting for comments, John, let me ask a question that's been posed here. Weren't Germans more respected because they often arrived with some money and moved to the West and set up shops or farms? So in the kind of the hierarchy of immigrants, Germans were seen above the Irish? Would that be fair to say?
Probably, yes. The Irish were almost by definition Catholic. The Germans were split between Lutheran and Catholic. Mm-hmm. The Germans were at a disadvantage for their language. They were equally considered clannish, like the Irish. They stuck to their language. They had communal organizations and self-help societies that separated them from the rest of America, American society. So they were deeply suspect because of that. They were, people were grateful because the Germans did have more resources that allowed them to migrate quicker mm-hmm. to the West. But they were still, they just weren't us. And the combined antipathy to the Irish and the Germans, and this is before the great Slavic immigration that takes place a generation later, Slavic and Italian immigration. So most of the immigration problem is German and Irish at this time, and how very quickly it all then gets folded into race as well.
John, let me ask you to refine that. You posed the question, if you were an American in 1855 looking at this painting, what would you think? To help us figure out that audience, what audience would be going to the National Academy? These would be presumably well-off Americans. I mean, obviously wouldn't be an African American, and it wouldn't be the people that servant there carrying wood. So this would be an upper-class, educated audience viewing this painting, right?
Yeah, they would be sophisticated. They were, yes, it would be a cultured audience who were, conversant in art. They would collect art. They would often know the artists. It was a relatively small upper-class cultured community in Manhattan at the time.
Okay, so we could rephrase our question to the participants then. If you were an educated upper-class Manhattanite in 1855 looking at this painting, what might you think about it? Let's see some comments on that. Certainly, you would see people that you're probably a bit, you worried about. These immigrants coming in, what are we going to do with them? We have this African American. It's a problem maybe here, certainly a problem in the South. Let's see what we say here. The posture of the black man makes me think, at first glance, that he is subservient. Upon a closer examination, he is kneeling on the log. He stops his work for the white man, but he does not assume a position of deference and respect. In my opinion, an intentional trick of the eye by the artist.
This is important, because I think this is a good point. Is that the German man is in the center. The black man is off to the side. The black man has also turned away from us. His back is to us. So he is at a visual disadvantage to us than the white man. So here, if you're talking from the filter of race, the white man is given prominence. The black man is secondary. The black man is sort of the one who activates the story, but the story is that of the white man, of the German inquiring his way. Now, then there's the issue of him as an immigrant, and what is his relationship to an American who is the black man. And there was one interpretation that I got from a college group one time, is that they thought the artist was saying that this German was so clueless as to ask a black man for directions, as someone who did not know the protocols of antebellum American society, that white men did not do that. And that also just indicates that this guy is not a welcome member of our community. That is one interpretation, and that would be the anti-immigrant, the know-nothing interpretation of the picture. But then it gets back to the artist is Charles Blauvelt, and I don't think an artist whose grandfather was a German is going to be saying those things about a German immigrant. I think he's going to be much more sympathetic to the German, and he's actually being a little bold in producing this painting in the midst of all of the nativist controversy that reaches its epicenter really in Manhattan in 1855. This is potentially an explosive picture.
Yeah, we have a good, what I think is a good comment here from Lane Whitaker. I would think that she's talking about how somebody in 1855 might look at this. I would think that it's a reflection of what I'm seeing in my city today. Much of the way that people would react if the figures were Hispanic. The face of my community, the face of the community, is changing. So that this picture might have produced some anxiety among the viewers in 1855.
I think it would, because it is certainly presenting them with a current event, a controversial topic, it would be, like I'm trying to think of what would be the equivalent now. I mean, immigration now would be the same. People come down on either side of it, and so you have a painting that is possibly sympathetic to the cause of the immigrant, or at least is asking for some sympathy, some understanding. There are going to be people who would have seen this painting and have dismissed it, and maybe angrily dismissed it, because this is a picture of a current event of 1855. It's not cute. It's not quaint. This was going on in New York City, right outside the doors of the National Academy.
Right. First of all, let me ask this: is the title Blauvelt? Did he give the title to the painting?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So maybe this is appealing to an American value of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. He is inquiring his way. He is going to make his way in American society. So maybe Blauvelt is arguing, look, do not come down on our German immigrant friends. They will make their way. And in fact, they're starting at the bottom, but they're determined to make their way, and they're trying to find out how to do it. Might that be a reading?
Yeah, I think that's pretty close to what I would say. Now, there was a comment about the woman in the background. I mean, to me, she's obviously the wife. She's carrying the family belongings. The husband is the pathfinder, and the little girl is curious and is shy, curious, and maybe a little afraid of what she's never seen before, a black man. So there's a little bit of humor injected in that, of the sort of naivete of the child. But the position of the woman, I mean, she's clearly a stock character, and she's relegated to the background. But that amplifies the foreignness of this family as they're coming ashore. Now, I'd like to go forward briefly and just talk about the painting in context of these other pictures that are in our collection of poor people, poor kids, primarily. I mean, what is also common in American art at the time is that if you're going to paint poor people, paint kids. One is because they may be poor, but they're cute, and they also have the potential to be something better. They can grow. It's the Horatio Alger. If you paint a down-and-out man in his 40s or 50s or something, he's going to be in the gutter all of his life. If you paint a kid, like in the lower right, you've got 4 shoeshine boys. There is always the potential these kids have got enough pluck to end up an Andrew Carnegie, and I think that is what made paintings of poor kids, and what they were often called. This is what's fun. In the 1880s, poor kids in the streets of New York, down in the Bowery, were often called street Arabs. Later they became known as street urchins, but street Arabs was a common term for them, and they lived hand to mouth. Most of these kids, the match seller in the upper right, the shoeshine boys and the or boot blacks as they were called in the lower right, most of these kids didn't live past adolescence, dying of violence or disease, neglect. The kids in the lower right, we know that they're Irish because they're inscribed on the box of the boy on the right is Pat, is the name Pat for Patrick, and that would have been a code that would have cued you in that this guy is Irish. In fact, we know his name. His name is Paddy Ryan, and we also know that he didn't live to be an adult. The artist John George Brown was one of the highest paid artists of his generation, and he made a specialty of painting poor street kids in New York, newspaper boys, boot blacks, and so on. These were paintings that were that were avidly collected by the rich and powerful and hung in Park Avenue palazzos. And it has always been one of these great conundrums for me, is that, what is the great appeal of paintings of poor people, of the destitute, or of immigrants for rich, comfortable Americans in the Gilded Age? Maybe it's something to do with the poor are always with us. Maybe paintings of the poor are easier to take than the actuality. I don't know, but there was a ready market for these kinds of images in 19th and early 20th century, 19th and early 20th century American art.
Okay. John, excuse me. I didn't mean to. Before we move on, though, there are some questions that and some comments I'd like to throw your way. First of all, could you comment on the golden tone of the Blauvelt painting?
I can try. Let me think on that. You could say, perhaps it is late afternoon, noonlight. He's trying to set a certain time of day with the light, the quality, the overall coloration. I don't know if I could go much beyond that, though.
Yeah, it does suffuse the painting with a kind of warmth, though. This is certainly it's not a confrontational painting. I mean, it's not in your face. It does, that's kind of warmth to it, I think.
No, but there is a confrontation here. It's
between the two characters.
The confrontation of cultures,
right,
and the confrontation of races, and
right,
it's taking place at a very, very volatile moment in American history.
Okay.
But maybe we should go on to the next one if we can, or.
Okay, but just two points. The John George Brown painting, a number of people have pointed out similarities between that painting and Jacob Riis's photographs, which come within Brown's life, and then also Norman Rockwell.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But particularly Jacob Riis and the sort of social reforming. Jacob Riis, his images were used in the social reformation of urban areas in New York and the rest of the country. He documented the destitution of poor, often the immigrant communities. What I like about A Tough Story is, even though the boys have been cleaned up and made sort of presentable for a polite audience, say the viewers at a National Academy exhibition, if you look at the eyes of the boys, the artist is honest enough to make them exhausted. That those eyes are much older than the boys themselves. These are kids who have really seen a lot of experience, and it's particularly the two kids in the middle just look pooped, and that's to the credit of the artist, who was, by all accounts, very sympathetic with these boys. He exploited them, but he paid them well as well.
Mm-hmm. And to wrap this up, we have a comment here. How would you incorporate these paintings in a literature or history class? What historical moment could you focus on? After analysis, how could you incorporate these paintings teaching a lesson? I think the John George Brown, that could certainly be compared to, you could use that in a lesson on urbanization. You could compare it to Riis. The Blauvelt certainly on the period of great German immigration, and you could provoke in your class a discussion between about the complex issues of race and immigration at the time. How might you do that, John? I know we've covered a lot of that, but
I mean, and with these paintings of children, is I would talk about the role of children, the changing attitudes of children in American society, and the growing social responsibilities of American society towards the destitute that you see, particularly in the post-Civil War era. So these paintings may be a reflection of that. They certainly document to a degree the problem, the urban problem of cities that were completely overwhelmed by immigration and unable to sustain these children except as beggars. The Blauvelt, I just see that if you can get people talking about the various, how to interpret the relationships between the figures, particularly between the German man and the black man, and get people to understand the 1850s and how volatile that kind of a meeting is. At that particular time, it's pushing the button not only of race but of immigration, and he's pushing it in a way that is palatable to people. He's making a work of art acceptable to consider these issues. I think this is a more agenda-driven painting than, say, the Christian Meyer painting that we saw earlier of the kitchen ball.
Right, right. Somebody made an interesting connection here between the John George painting and the Horatio Alger Ragged Dick novels, and I think there you could capture the idea, you could capitalize on your note on the idea that the eyes of these young boys are exhausted, and those eyes could be a comment on the Horatio Alger stories.
And look at the eyes of the match seller. That's 1859.
Yeah.
But let me move on.
Yes, let's move on then.
The third painting. Now for something completely different. Thomas Hart Benton's depiction of a flood. It's called Spring on the Missouri, but it is based upon drawings that he made as a newspaper artist in the 1930s for the Kansas City newspaper when the Mississippi River flooded. And this was the last period when newspapers would use artists rather than photographers to document news stories. And they sent Benton down to the flooded areas of the Mississippi. He made lots of sketches. Some of them were published in the newspaper. He kept those sketches, and they became grist for a number of paintings that he produced over the next 10 years. The most important is this one, which he then, for reasons I can't explain, called Spring on the Missouri. I mean, spring makes sense. It's the floods from the melting snows. But why he then transferred the locale to the Missouri, I don't know. But there is no one drawing that he made in his reporting that relates to this image. Rather, it's the experience of drawing a whole group of things that he saw. Say, you can see pieces of the image in a number of his drawings. It was more of the experience. If we look at the lithograph he made in 1937 in the lower right here, that is based on one of his drawings. These are the kinds of things that he produced, and then it gestated. The images gestated in the case of our picture for 8 more years, so that at the very end of World War II, he produces Spring on the Missouri. And as I said, it was bought by Harpo Marx, which has always endeared this painting to me somewhat irrationally. But then that's a whole nother subject, is collectors. And Hollywood collectors in particular loved these kinds of paintings of rural middle America between the coasts. They collected Grant Wood and Thomas Hart Benton, John Stewart Curry, the artist that became known as the regionalist. They found a very avid collecting group in Los Angeles among Hollywood collectors. That's aside. Let's look at this painting. You analyzed it, the visual evidence I rather like the idea, are they unloading or are they loading? I hadn't really thought of that before. I suspect they're loading. I don't think they've achieved high ground yet. They're trying to get away from it, even though all the wagons are pointed towards the river. One assumes they're going to turn them around. But the way Benton took the sketches that you could almost see as like the snapshots of the actual experience of the flooding of the Mississippi River, and he transmuted them into a work of art. You can see how very carefully calibrated this picture is. He could not have seen this scene. He has invented it from elements that he saw from his own experience, his own emotional experience. It is, to me, as much an emotional response to witnessing the flood and the struggle of these people as it is any kind of realistic documentation. The way he has divided the scene into dark and light, and the threatening storm that is bearing down upon it sort of just adds more to the calamity. The way that these people are caught in between dark and light, but they're also wedged between the architecture, between the shotgun house on the left and the outbuilding on the right. The way the land is rutted in ways that make it seem almost as if it's liquid. It's flowing into the water. The luridness of the color, slightly acid, very edgy color. It's not realistic color. It is color. It's an emotional color. It's intended to heighten the drama of the scene, and the whole thing is highly dramatic. It's not melodramatic. It's almost as if it is recreated on a stage, and it's lit by stage lights. The brilliant light that seems to be coming from off to the right and washing the dirt, highlighting the dirt as a counter to the darkness of the sky. All of that seems highly theatrical in its concept, and that gets into the what is the story here? What is we talked about Steinbeck on Tuesday, but there are a great many sort of Depression era theater pieces, WPA theater pieces that talk about the struggles of the common person, the common man, during the Dust Bowl, it was like nature was conspiring against the poor person. That they could not even hold on to their land in Oklahoma or Nebraska and such. And here you have the floods that and yet in all of this, with nature against them, these people are enduring, and it maybe go back to the William Faulkner's sense of man is enduring and prevailing. If I'm remembering his Nobel speech, where he believed that man would not just endure but prevail. I think there's some of that in this painting of Benton's, what he's trying to address.
John, you mentioned the Great Depression, and this painting screams Great Depression, it seems to me, although it was done in 1945. And we have a really interesting comment from Linda that could link this to the Great Depression in the classroom. She writes, "There is no stability in the painting. The ground is not firm and stable. Stormy weather looks as if it's about to swallow up the land. The instability of life in general with the moving of the farmers." And so I think there you could, that obviously would connect with the Great Depression. But Lane writes about the time in which the painting was done, 1945. He writes, I'm just making the connection with the date this painting was done. The lighter colors on the right and the wagon at the top of the rise that is unencumbered suggest a happy ending. I wonder if the artist is suggesting that as World War II ends, America will survive the struggle and ultimately prevail. And that was written before your comments on Faulkner. So if you were teaching this, would you put it in the Great Depression? And there's warrant for that because it's based on sketches from 1937. Or would you bring it in 1945, post, end of World War II? And let our teachers in on this too. Let's hear your comments. Where would you go with this, John?
I would first connect it to Benton's experience of the Great Depression and the struggles of the 1930s in the Mississippi River Valley, and his experience of that. I would have a harder time metaphorically connecting it to World War II or the victory in World War II. I think there's something to be said about the fact that these people are heading towards the light, and that you could maybe draw a hopeful conclusion from that. But I don't think you want to extrapolate a global story from this. I think Benton is still being, focusing still on the plight of the common man. If you say anything about World War II, it's just that it has had no effect. It's like there's a persistence of poverty, of struggle, of common valor in the lives of these people, and he has chosen to dedicate his art to ennobling that, to not just reporting on the plight of the poor, but somehow showing that they are that they're noble, that they're heroic, and that very much is how Benton believed what he believed. He had put himself in opposition to modern art very, very quickly. He dabbled in modern art briefly as a young artist, and then rejected it. He rejected Picasso, rejected Matisse, all forms of abstraction, and instead, along with people like Grant Wood, who's here on the upper right, he left the city. He felt New York was toxic. He felt New York was really not even an American city. It was just the outpost of Europe, and he went looking to America, which is basically going back to his own roots in Missouri, and found subjects there in the lives of the common people, in the mythologies, the folk stories, and the folk songs of that part of the country. And Grant Wood, who also rejects European modernism and opts for a somewhat Art Deco vision of rural America. I never said it like that before, but it's actually when you think of the Wizard of Oz, when they created the Emerald City, and a lot of the sets of the Wizard of Oz were inspired by Grant Wood paintings. A little known fact, but the idea of there being greater authenticity and truth in readable depictions of rural America, small town America. It was a very popular art style called regionalism, and its heyday was really between the wars, and somewhat petered out afterwards. And even though Thomas Hart Benton had lived a very long life, the last 20, 30 years of his life, he was something of a lone prophet raging against the triumph of American modernism. But if you look at, let's see, these are the kinds of artists, kinds of images that Benton just detested, and he was a master of invective. He could, what he would say about Georgia O'Keeffe is just not printable. But he felt like all of these artists were just really acolytes of Europe, and that they had no American soul, and that for an artist to truly be American and to realize his or her potential, he had to draw upon American experience, not New York, but to go back to the farms and to the small towns, and that was where America was. So he's deeply believing this in the 1930s and the 1940s when he's producing this picture. He sees this as the alternative to modernism, that this is this kind of painting is redemptive because it holds up to America the image of its true self, which is believe in the little people and don't listen to all the pointy heads of the city or the big universities, but that the real honest American character is to be found in these people who are struggling against all odds and yet prevailing. Sounds like a speech, so I'm going to shut up for a while. What else does anybody want to talk about?
John, we'll ask people to raise more questions, but Carol has made an interesting comment that catches up your notion, your interest in the fact that the people might be moving back in. She writes, doesn't the mud insinuate that the water has receded and they're moving back in? And if you read it that way, perhaps those black clouds are passing away, and the white and the light sky will take over more of the painting. And after all, the title is Spring on the Missouri. Spring suggests new beginning, new life. Anything there?
No, I would say no. Well, because
all right.
If you're living in the Mississippi River, the word spring means flood.
Okay.
You are going to. It means it's a very worrisome time. But the other thing is, if you're trying to put together a painting, do you want to put together a painting of people unloading their stuff and going back into the shotgun house and all is well, or are you going to show the moment of great drama and tragedy? Are they going to make it? Are they going to get out? The clouds are lowering upon them. I think if you just look at the dramatic imperative here, these people aren't safe. They're endangered, and that's what makes them heroic. And I really do think that's what Thomas Hart Benton's after.
You've convinced me. I was just trying a different interpretation.
Well, I mean,
you've convinced
spring
me.
in North Carolina means azaleas and
there we go. So if this had spring in the Tar Heel State, it would be an entirely different painting. Okay, John, any other comments you would like to make here? The people are talking about the animals and. Any particular comments you'd like to make about the two mules? The people have commented on the symbolism, if there is any symbolism in the white mule. Anything you see there?
I don't think there's any real symbolism in the colors of the animals, except that that the fact that they're mules means they are not horses. They're not. It's not. These are poor people's animals. You know, so there, all of the elements of the story combine to show that these people have very are materially impoverished.
Right.
And you know, again, if you look at the short story aspects of this painting, the picture that is left behind in the rut, these kinds of things that are just left for you to wonder about. Is anybody going to pick it up and put it in the cart, or has it been tossed aside? You know, those are, you know, the lightning that is forking out of the sky. Where is it going to land? What is going to happen to that house that is in the middle of the flood at the time?
Right. And people have asked, is that Granny sitting under the pink blanket in the other wagon?
You mean like in the Beverly Hillbillies? I would hope not.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me move us here. Okay, John. Yes, you or Ashley, going to wrap up.
May I make a comment here, Richard?
Go right ahead.
Thank you. It's been fascinating to see all the chat, and I think one of the things that I'm noticing is that as we begin to hear more information about these works of art, we go back to the details and we go back to looking closely and trying to figure out how all of this information kind of fits in with what we see, and how does it create a new view of what we see. But also there are still questions, and there will always be questions about these objects, and even as we learn more and more, and different interpretations are shared by scholars, et cetera, and by students, we continue to have questions and wonder. And that's one of the great things about art, is something to come back to. And just like museums are places to come back to see works of art over and over again, hopefully they'll be continually used in your classroom, not just once, but to use them as much as possible and then have students reflect on them. But I'd like to just throw out this last question. How do you see and understand these works of art differently than you did when they were first introduced on Tuesday? Any comments there?
Okay, good question. I know I see them differently, but let's hear from our participants. How do they see them differently? Let's have some quick comments. Thinking of them in a more contextual manner, great. Context a little better when we know the background of the artist. Process of telling a short story. Yes, that's a good way to conceive of the more historical context. I feel that I looked beyond first glance and began to look deeper, looking for more for the short story. Yeah, that's going to be a valuable teaching tool. Kitchen Ball reminds me to think about who the artist is and who the customers were, not jumping to conclusions. Artist biography, especially interesting. Consider how people of the time saw it. Yes, the question of audience. Process of reading a painting is remarkably similar to approaching poetry for the first time. They will work in my AP courses. Great, wonderful. All right. Techniques for utilizing these items with my students.
Great. One of the things that I do want to encourage is you already, you as educators know how to do good analysis. All you have to do is transfer that same process to works of art. You know how to ask good questions. You know how to get students to delve deeper into what they're reading or what they're researching. Here it is, just what they see. And again, making connections is important, helping students to make personal connections to text that you're reading, connections to the world at large. These are all basic comprehension strategies, and works of art are text that are visual text. And as John has elucidated, a great way of thinking about them as short stories, but even could be amplified. So there's many more lesson plans on the Art & See website that we had showed you last week, and that I was posting some links to here. Several of the comments that were made today about how to use these works in the classroom, you can see models of that in those lessons at the high school level. Many of them are at that particular level, and we just thank you from our standpoint here so much for spending some time with us and spending some time with these works of art. You can find high quality images on the Art & See website as well as within this PowerPoint.
Okay, well, please do check the Art & See website. We'll post the URL to that on the form, so you'll be able to find that URL plus the URL to our bibliography. I guess we have addressed all of your questions, and none seem to be coming in. I remind you about our bibliography that's available, and again, the Art & See on the North Carolina Museum's website. John, Ashley, I want to thank you both for giving us 2 wonderful seminars. I learned a lot, and I think from the chat we've seen here that our participants learned a lot as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Great. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys, and I now want to thank our participants. You have been really great. You've given us a lot to think about. Your comments have changed my thinking about the paintings, as well as John and Ashley's comments. Thank you for your intelligent and energetic participation. Please use the forum to continue the discussion. We will monitor it through May 15th, passing any comments and questions on to John and Ashley for their response. Please remember to submit your evaluations. As I said earlier, they mean a great deal to us. I hope you'll join us again for some more online seminars. Please check the National Humanities Center's website. We'll soon be posting our fall 2012 schedule. I think we've got a lot of interesting topics for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me end by saying thank you and good evening. You can escape the classroom by going up to the upper left-hand corner of your screen, clicking File. The drop-down menu will say Exit Session, and out you go. Thank you very much again. Hope you'll be with us again sometime soon.